Welcome to the Actually You Can podcast. I'm Miff Galloway, a performance coach passionate about supporting ambitious and high-performing women just like you who know they have untapped potential just waiting to be unleashed. If you're looking to massively up-level your performance in all areas of life, you've come to the right place. My goal on this podcast is to take you beneath the surface so you can connect with yourself on a deeper level while providing you with valuable insights and the tools necessary to navigate life's challenges and go after your goals with strength, clarity, and wisdom. If you're ready to uncover the truth which lies underneath so you can recognize your powerful feminine leadership style, pursue your goals unapologetically, and thrive in every aspect of your life, hit the follow button and get ready to explore the incredible possibilities that lie within you. Together, we'll uncover your next steps in achieving peak performance, because actually, you can. Hi, Brenda. Welcome to the show today. It's a pleasure to have you on.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
And so we're going to talk about all things workplace dynamics. And to kick things off, I would love to learn, why do people call you the Grim Reaper in HR?
That's, it's actually just a joke. So I was, I was doing on stage a transformational speech, and, I joke around about being a recovering HR professional, right? Because it's pretty heavy job. And so, I just suddenly spontaneously came out with affectionately known as the Grim Reaper. And it came from years ago when I worked for one of the Fortune 500 companies I used to work for. We used to have this HR professional, and the only time that we saw her was when she came to fire somebody. So she had gotten the nickname the Grim Reaper. And so when I say that I'm an HR professional affectionately known as the Grim Reaper, it's everybody knows it's kind of a joke, right? Like, oh yeah, here to do it, do what you do. And it's so that's I've never had anybody ask me that question before. That's awesome. So
I saw
it's
that
just
and I'm
a
like,
fun way
yeah,
to break the ice. Yeah. You know.
it's so good. And when I read that, I was like, it's so true. So my full-time role, I'm
It
in
is, right?
HR, and a lot of people will go, oh, we've got to bring in HR, or if there's performance reviews, or if HR is talking, it's like this, oh, HR's here.
Yeah.
What was your experience with HR? Like, in terms of, from my experience being part of that team now, we're not here to fire people all the time or performance manage. If you give us a
No.
reason to, we will. But at the end of the day, we actually really like people and we want to help you grow and
Yeah.
develop. It's not all about punishment.
Well, it isn't. And that's the thing is that, if somebody's one sole experience with an HR professional is someone who's constantly taking them out or, is just like, the spawn of Satan or something like that. It's like, then either your company doesn't have its priorities aligned or, the person that's sitting in the HR seat really truly has a bad disposition, or people just don't understand what HR is. And to be honest with you, our job in HR is to really help figure out in unique situations. We have a seat at the table, is to figure out in these unique situations how to do what's in the best interest of the company as well as the best interest of the people. And sometimes it's the company and other times it's the employees. I mean, there have been times where I've had CEOs tell me, they're like, well, we want to fire our employee. And I'm like, don't do that. As it's, I get you just want to get rid of this problem quickly, but you have an opportunity here to flip this around. And if the person doesn't do it, it's not your problem to solve, it's theirs. And then they're like, I've never had anybody look at it that way. And I said, well, it's because you haven't worked with me. And so it's just like, I get the frustration and everything, but there's ways to actually disconnect yourself from that. And look, working with people is not an easy thing sometimes. And leadership is one of those things where it's like, it can be lonely, it can be exhausting, it is extremely demanding, and you've got to have some pretty thick skin in order to navigate it because it is not for the light of heart.
And I can imagine that as part of your 30 years working in HR, you've seen some pretty interesting situations and you've
Oh
seen a
my
number of
yes.
different challenges from leaders. What are some common challenges leaders have with people? What are some common people problems?
Well, in a bigger respect, a lot of leaders are challenged with how do we keep the culture to what they want to define it as? And, that's a trickle down effect, right? The CEO and the C-suite, they're responsible for making sure that the culture is consistent. They define it and then make sure that it gets, it's consistent throughout the organization. And that means constantly making sure that managers are speaking to it and they're leading to it, right? But probably the one thing that, other than a phone call from the board of directors, the one thing that will derail somebody's day is that when you have a really difficult person working on the team, such as somebody who wants to argue and debate everything because they have a different perspective or they're having a different experience and they don't really know how to handle it. They may not necessarily be mature or they've hit their limit, or quite frankly, they just have a different worldview and they're not in line with your company ethics. That can be, or even the extreme where you're dealing like with somebody who has very narcissistic traits. That's exhausting after a while. It really
Yeah.
is, and our multi-generational workforce is so different now than what it has ever been before in the US, and that takes a lot of energy as well, because how do you keep 4 generations in one workplace happy all at the same time? It's a challenge.
Yeah, I notice it in Australia too, the multi-generational workforce, and see the challenges even in my workplace with that. It seems like the clash of generations, the older generations that are like, young kids just don't want to work hard anymore than younger generations acknowledging that we have such great privilege and opportunity and being a bit more demanding of that. And it seems like just the clash of the titans, clash of the generation.
It is, and, it's funny because the older generation, like, when I was the rising first employee, like, they would say those things about us, but the thing is that the difference is they could literally whomp us in the butt, and,
Yes.
we were, like, truly threatened by not having a job because, we didn't have technology. Finding a job for us was looking in the newspaper for a job. It was going door to door to businesses and saying, "Can I please an application?" And they didn't have to give you one. The convenience of information has shifted the dynamics of how people engage in the workplace. This thing right here, this
Yeah.
thing it's a dopamine hit. My generation, we had to know what the Dewey Decimal System was in the library and go to this drawer with all these little pieces of paper in it to find what we had to find. We had to do things differently. Where in this generation, like, somebody can write a paper by simply just loading up the content and chat and spitting it out in 5 minutes, where it may have taken us 5 weeks to compose, right? So the speed at which information comes at us not is not only that, it's the ability for us to actually produce on top of it. So, a younger generation who understands how to effectively use that type of technology and navigate more rapidly compared to a workforce where it's like we had to show the work, we had to show the math. It's very different. So, but, the generation now, I'm one of those old ones, and I can't whomp the young folks, but I can certainly use my advantage of hardcore knowledge, hands-on, institutional knowledge to effectively coach and teach and form people to help them understand that, listen, when that thing shuts off and we lose our power, some of us are gonna make it, others are not. What? It's like, we're a little hardier. It's just in that it's just, fact. Have you ever seen those videos on, like, social media where the teenagers are given a rotary dial phone and they have to figure out how to use it? Have you ever seen that? Oh
No,
my
but I
god.
feel like I want to go look at that.
You should, it's hilarious. So,
Uh,
I mean, our TVs had to warm up and nobody really understands exactly what that meant. They know that meant. So,
uh, I feel I'm in that sweet spot where I'm old enough to have grown up with like Discmans and the dial up phone and dial up internet, but also privileged enough to have the tech from, I guess, when I started in the workforce. So I'm not having to learn tech as I entered the workforce. And so I love that
yeah.
little sweet spot where I'm just like, back in my day, I can say that to the youngins. And then I can also use technology to advantage like ChatGPT. I was like, I don't think I don't like this. I don't like this where it's going. And I'm like, this is here to stay.
No, it's not going anywhere. I was talking
Yeah.
to a friend of mine yesterday who just started up a company 3.5 months ago. And he's a military background, does intelligence work, and he was telling me that they have a self-contained AI system that they put together in 4 months. And I'm like, "Are you telling me you built an AI, hasn't touched the internet system in less than 4 months that you can effectively put to market right now doing the kind of work that you do for the government?" He goes, "Yep." I was like, "Oh
Oh,
gosh." That blew
yeah.
my mind when I heard that yesterday. I was like, "Oh my word." So,
Oh my
yeah,
gosh.
it's amazing what's out there.
And I want to step back from what you talked about with culture. And I think culture is
Yeah.
a really big thing. And from my very naive perspective, I'm like, just hire the right people and the culture will take care of itself. And I can appreciate that could be fact in small business where you're not hiring bulk people at speed and you might have a small team. But how important is recruitment for organizations in terms of being able to maintain culture and also avoiding some of those challenging people dynamics down the track?
So so the first part of your question is finding the cultural fit is there's a couple things that you have to kind of do. So the first one is that like you have to ask the right kind of questions. And and I have a philosophy that when you ask good questions, you get great answers. So if you're listening effectively, which basically means you have to listen more and talk less, and that's what you should be doing when you're interviewing people and actually figure but you have to figure out what it is that's the most important to your business. And that means that you have to clearly define your values. You got to clearly define, what kind of outcome you want people to experience. So, one of my favorite mentors of all time, he's a pastor for a church. He's my pastor actually, and he lives by this exact same core value, number one core value that he leads his family with, he leads the church with, and it's never let good be the robber of great. Brilliant, right?
Yeah.
So how do you measure so how do you effectively lead to that? Well, when you're up against a decision or if you're looking at a project and here's the end product and you sit around and they present it to you and if you're the leader and you ask the question, it's like, well, okay, so what do you think about this? Well, I think it's good. Well, is it good or is it great? Because if it's good, our value is never let good be the robber of great. So have we reached great by your analysis of being good? And if they can't answer yes, you're not there yet. Right? So it's like I have five businesses and because I'm addicted apparently. And um and my core value is integrity. My number one core value is integrity. So every decision that I make and the people that I work with and the people that work with me, I'll ask the question. It's like, okay, so we're faced here, with the pivot point. We're faced with having to make a difficult decision. What's the right thing to do? And some of us, vast majority of us that I work with, they'll be like, well, we think we should be doing this. And one person is like, but is that really necessary? And it's like, well, if it's not necessary, what's the right thing to do then? And I'll challenge them on it. And they're like, "Well, I don't know." And I said, "Well, if you can't answer that question and the consensus is that the right thing to do is this, then we should be doing the right thing. Let's make that the right thing then, right?" And so one of my favorite all-time bosses that I've ever had, he used to have it wasn't so much a core, well, I guess it was a core value. It was more like living up to the business objective, but it's the same kind of principle that it was an automotive dealership. And so people would come up to him and say, "Hey, listen, I have this idea for something." And he was always willing to listen. And they said, "Well, I think we should be doing this." And then he would come back and he would ask him one question. And he'd say, is if we do this, is this gonna help us sell more cars? And if the answer was no, which it was like 95% of the time, he'd say, "Well, I appreciate you coming." He said, "But if the answer is no, then it's not worth us pursuing." right? And what had happened over time, because he nurtured that and he stood by that principle and he stood by that practice. Anytime somebody would come up to him and say, "Hey, listen, I have an idea, and by the way, I think it's gonna help us sell more cars," then he's like, "I'm all ears, let's get into it," right? But over time, and that's how you nurture culture, is that consistent reinforcement of what's important. And what happens is that sometimes we forget to reinforce what we have defined as important. And then we get in our own way by sometimes allowing what we think or feel to dictate the way forward. Right. And it's our ego. And our ego is not always bad. Our ego is actually really good for us. It's what protects us. It's what nurtures us. It helps us, like stranger danger, right? Our ego is what is meant is a mechanism to put in place to make sure that we're still practicing self-efficacy. The problem with this is that in this in this world where we have many viewpoints, we have many worldviews. Like one of the best analogies I've ever heard was when you look at a lemon and you put on a pair of blue glasses or glasses with blue lenses,
Mm.
what color is the lemon?
Is it a lie?
Well, it's green, right? But that's the
Yeah.
thing. The lemon is still yellow. It's just
Yeah.
how you're seeing it and how you're perceiving it through this filter that now makes it a different color. So your worldview of the lemon has now shifted just based off of the filter that's in front of you. So when you have people that get into spats, they're usually coming from a place of how is this thing going to benefit me? And if somebody's saying no, I don't like that. And now I'm at risk of losing face, time, resources. My work is going to get harder. There's change, right? And so what happens is that our ego then now is like it's a dance of life, right? And you always lead with your right foot. Well, guess what? Your ego is now leading with the wrong foot. Rather than taking a step back and falling back on your core values and saying, well, is this really the right thing to do? Or whatever your values are, right? So, is this going to make this a great place to work? Is this going to, help our customers thrive and be highly successful? So we're getting away from that because and honestly, it's an easy thing to do when you have a bunch of people that are coming in that don't have that same view and they're looking at a green lemon.
Yeah. And lots of things coming to mind hearing what you've just shared. And the first, I think, in terms of recruitment and the right cultural fit, it's just making sure that they value that value. And that's the
Yeah,
sort of starting point. It doesn't mean that they're going to be, that doesn't guarantee that culture is going to be upheld. It's a continuous effort
absolutely.
from everyone involved using those values as what you mentioned, filters for decisions moving forward. Because even just hearing you mention those, when the ego comes into play and what I guess results into some challenging dynamics is people might have the same values, but they're looking at it through their lens, and that's where they're clashing. Like, for
That's right.
example, I can see, I'm thinking of a couple of examples right now where someone, because my belief, and this is my belief, but I'd love for you to try it on. I believe that humans have really good intentions. The execution might be poor, but I think at the heart, humans have really good intentions. And so, if there's challenges in the workplace, it's likely not because they're a bad person. It's because there's either a miscommunication or, to your point, there's an ego involved, there's a values clash or something like that. If someone has been recruited because they have the same values and there are starting to be challenging dynamics, what are some of the causes for that? And what can people do to start addressing those? I mean, I'm sure there's multiple
Yeah.
different kinds of reasons, but you mentioned some like they want to save face, time, resources, ego. I'd love to
Yeah.
dig into potentially some of those a bit more.
Yeah. And like, look, we can have six people on a team of 15 or 20. And if six people are working on one thing, it's likely that all six people are coming at the same objective from a different, like, you can accomplish the same thing from multiple directions. Where in group dynamics, where people start building their protective walls and and putting those bricks up, is because there is a risk that they're afraid that they're going to lose something, right? So, one of the best things that you can do, go back to my number one action that I talked about earlier, is ask good questions, get good answers. but then you have to listen more and talk less. Like if you're listening to understand and to diagnose and to figure out what's going on, like a couple weeks ago, I was out to lunch with a friend of mine, and he was in his head about something completely different. And I didn't even know what was going on. Yeah, it's like he kept taking phone calls, which was very uncommon. I just kind of stayed in my little swim lane. I didn't ask questions or anything like that. And he finally sat down and he said, "So how are you doing this?" And he said, "So what's new?" And I started telling him about something and he started getting really frustrated and he started getting really punchy with me. And I'm thinking, the hell?
Yeah.
Like,
What have I
it is
done? Like,
and I'm just
yeah.
like, where are we going with this, right?
Yeah.
And so, he just kept kinda getting rammy, and I finally looked at him, I'm like, "Okay, I'm not quite sure I understand what you're wanting me to say. You asked me a question how something is going, and now somehow we've managed to get on a different topic. What is going on?" I said, "Can help," and I said to him, I'm like, "Help me understand what you're looking from me as an answer." And he told me, right? And so "help me understand" is one of my favorite phrases of all times because it helps you really slice through that drama. It really does very quickly. And it works with any personality. It works in any situation. I mean, you can use it with your coworkers. You can use it with your boss. You can use it with the people that work under you. You can use it on your spouse. You can use it on your kids. You can use it on your best friend. You can use it on your in-laws and you can use it on your outlaws, right? It's just amazing.
Yeah.
And I love asking that question, like, okay, because it's like, help me understand, and it completely eliminates the dance that you have to dance with an ego. Because if they don't answer the question, they're going to look foolish, and you're not making it about them. See, that's the thing. You're not activating the defenses. You're actually getting to the heart of the root. And then finally, he said to me, he's like, "Yeah, I kinda did shift on you," and I'm like, "Yeah, a little bit." Like, that and you're about ready to take my head off, and I'm trying to figure out what I said, and he says, "It's not you." I'm like, "Okay, now we're getting to it here." And so, I called him the next day, and I'm like, "I just wanna check, make sure you're okay, and you got through whatever it was that you were going through." It had something to do with his military disability stuff that he was navigating, and it's been an absolute nightmare, and apparently he was getting phone calls trying to sort through something and he was getting more and more aggravated instead of telling me about it. It was just kind of like festering. And I'm like, this is so weird. It's a beautiful Friday. We're out by the water watching dolphins swim and I'm getting decapitated on the 28th floor of this restaurant roof. I'm like, what the hell's going on? Right. So instead of fighting back, I'm like, help me understand what is going on with you? So, that's one of the things. Matter of fact, I was going to share this with your audience at the end. It's like, I'm going to give you a free gift, and that's going to include how to use that kind of language to help you navigate. And it doesn't matter. You can talk to somebody who's an egomaniac or somebody who has narcissistic tendencies, and you can use this and you're going to navigate all of that drama. And if they don't answer you, they're not listening, right? So it's like, okay, so I hear you. So help me understand what is going on, right? It's one of the most effective phrases I have ever used, and I use it all the time. Like to the point some of my friends like, "Don't you go HR on me," and I'm like, "Oh, shut up, just answer the question."
I need a new phrase because my version of that is I'm just curious. And my boss has learned that means
Yeah.
I'm asking what the fuck. So
Yeah,
help me
right,
to
exactly.
understand is another
Yeah,
phrase for the repertoire. So I'll pull that
yeah,
out
help me
and see what
understand.
version I can help me
Yeah.
understand.
And if you ever notice that when somebody tells you something strange, like here's a really good example, right? My number one live and die rule is in the absence of information, people make stuff up. Like,
Oh,
if you
100.
ever know yeah, and if you don't believe me, just watch a 13-year-old girl with her first boyfriend, and he doesn't call her, text back in 10 minutes after because they're gonna be like, "Oh my god, maybe they're in a ditch somewhere." And it's like, "No, they're just probably getting grounded or something." I don't know, right? But we do this. It's like we cannot not know. We have
Yeah.
to put and attach a story to something. We can't just be comfortable with see here, Grace. We can't just be comfortable with somebody saying something and then us leaving it right there. It's like we have to form a story around it. So much so that there's a lot of us that actually get carried away and then like we see somebody acting in a certain way. And one of my one of my other favorite mentors makes a statement and he's like, whatever the evidence you're looking for in the world, you're going to find it. So if you think that somebody is thinking something negatively about you because of how they're acting, and you believe that it's targeted towards you, but they could be like my friend, right? He was reacting to something and I could and immediately I'm like, "What, did I say something wrong?" It's like I'm asking about it. I'm not evaluating and judging his actions saying, "Oh my gosh, Mike is doing this." And all of a sudden, it's like I've said something, and now he's upset about this and like I haven't created that story. I disconnected from that cuz I know better now. And I'm just like, "Dude, what?" You know? But we do this, and then, like, at work, what happens is that we create the story in our minds because we have to, and next thing you know it, you're standing in your boss's office looking at your boss saying, like, "Well, Bob says, I know Bob thinks this about me, and I know that this is what Bob is intending and doing." And it's so like, "Have you heard Bob say this?" "No." "Well, then how the hell do you know what Bob is thinking?" And we do this to ourselves. But again, if the evidence is out there, right? Or if we're looking for evidence, we're going to find it. So we might as well flip that narrative around and make the evidence be in a positive way. It's like, okay, so with my friend Mike the other day, right? I immediately looked for the evidence that can turn it around. And in this case, it was like, Mike, help me understand what's going on in your world. Like, how did we get here? And that's when he came out and he said, so it had nothing to do with something that I had to say. It had to do with something that I couldn't even see.
I'd be interested in, I'm not going to hold you to this particular percentage, but how many challenges would you encounter in the workplace are challenges because someone has taken something personally when it really had nothing to do about them?
Daily occurrence.
It's like it really has
Even
nothing to do with you.
yeah, has nothing to do. What's really funny? So my dad, when he was alive, my dad actually got into a car accident many, 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 many years ago, and he sliced his forehead. And so what happened is that the muscle structure made his face droop. So he'd sit there, and he has this, and apparently I have the same look, but with his scar, it made drop. So we have this like intimidating look. So when we're listening, we're like this, and and people look at us like, oh my god, they're suddenly like
You're
intimidated,
pissed.
like.
Yeah.
And I'm just listening, I'm, like, dialed in, like, so I like, when I listen, it's like I literally have to sit like this, so my so
Like a
and I'm
cheesy
actually
grin on your
trained
face.
yeah, just so I can adjust my face. So I'm very self-aware about that, right? But, again, it's like the evidence will be there if you're looking for it.
Yeah. It's like,
So
Brenda, your
it's
face
just
is doing the thing again.
yeah, and it's just kinda like, so when I see somebody and their body language going off, and, like, last night I was at a coaching session for transitioning veterans, and the guy that I actually am assigned to coach one-on-one, I noticed he was getting all fidgety, and he's like, I'm talking about stuff and I'm looking at him and I'm like, okay, well, I'm not going to address it right now because clearly something's going on. And finally at the end, and I'm like, so how was your day? And he's like, it was a day. And I'm like, oh, you having a moment here in life? He goes, yes, my ex. And I'm like, oh, well, then that's what it
Wow.
was. Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, but I mean, it's just like, we can believe what we see, or we can just ask.
Yeah, but asking is scary, and sometimes we don't wanna know the answer. It's better if we just make up the answer ourselves because at least if we get the answer, I'm just
That's
hearing
what
all
we
these
tell our
excuses. Yeah,
yeah. That's what we
100%.
tell ourselves, but we're full of crap.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you, thank
Yeah,
you.
full of crap.
And I I love the resources you've already shared. And so I'd like to get a bit more specific in terms of if you're a leader having people challenges with someone on your team, what are some
Yeah.
strategies you could use to address that? That I'd love to go from the perspective of an employee if you're having challenges
Yeah.
with senior management. So let's start leadership.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, this works for everybody, right? So we talked about ask good questions, get good answers, listen more, talk less. But when it comes to a leader, the power of your leadership will always lie in your follow up. If you are strong at following up, reinforcing, trust but verify, resetting expectations, holding to those boundaries, that's all follow up. Checking
Wow.
in on people. You are going to be an extremely strong leader, even if they don't initially buy into what it is that you're selling them. Because it is a long game approach. There's nothing out there in this world that is going to instantly let you catch lightning in a bottle when it comes to being a leader, you have to put the work in. And that's true with anything, right? You might have that, like, I've caught lightning in a bottle a couple of times, but I haven't been able to replicate that on a consistent basis,
I
and I
love that.
recognize it for what it is. But that is a thing. And, a lot of there's something about leaders too. Leaders will look at having to make decisions about things and people differently than the average employee. So one of my guys that graduated from this transition program, I ran into him last night and he was telling me how he now has a CEO position in a startup and he couldn't be happier. He's an entrepreneur now. He's super excited. They're doing bang up work. I mean, honestly, in 4 months, not even 4 months, the company's already worth $7 million, and they bootstrapped that whole program themselves. I know. It's just like I'm totally blown out of the water, but their collective specialty is just absolutely phenomenal. And so we were talking about, I said, "Well, congratulations, man, on landing the CEO position. I think that," they said, you're a great fit for that." And he says, "Yeah." He says, "Matter of fact, right now we have enough funds to hire 2 people and we want 4." And we both looked at each other and agreed that's a good problem to have. And so I said, "But you're gonna learn that your people problems are gonna be way different now than what they were when you were an enlisted leader in the military." And he goes, "Oh my gosh, yeah, no kidding." And I said, "Right now, you're probably trying to wonder, like, do I have the right people to push this widget through? What is it that we need to train them on? And, is this gonna help us scale the business?" I said, 2 years ago when I first met you, you were trying to figure out why, like, little Timmy wasn't coming to work on time." And he goes, "Yeah, completely different,
100%.
totally different." Yeah. So, that's the difference. And so leaders, when they look at problems, and this is a huge disconnect between employers and employees. When you have a leader, a CEO, high level leader, whatever, when there's an issue that comes up, they have to evaluate whether or not that issue is well worth pursuing. And so they're either going to address it head on, or they're going to assign it to somebody else to eliminate the problem. But rest assured, they're going to get rid of the problem. And for some leaders, when they see an issue, like if an employee and a leader see the exact same thing going on, the leader is going to determine whether or not that is worth their energy to go after in their time, because it's time is their number one commodity. But they feel it's not. Getting rid of a problem to them can also simply be just not acknowledging it. But in the eyes
Yes.
of an employee of which who's being impacted by that, they're gonna look at that and say, "This dude is completely sweeping it under the carpet." When in fact, it's just a value evaluation. It means more to the employee than it does the employer or the leader, right? That is a disconnect. And I'm kind of playing in this thought process lately about how impactful that is, and haven't really, like, thought more about it than just realizing what it is. But it is an issue. So it means, in my mind, is that when an employee comes up and addresses this with a leader, go back to the follow-up piece, you need to follow up with the employee and say, "You know what, I appreciate you bringing this to my attention. I've given it some thought. I've run it up the ladder. I've talked to the ELC about it, executive leadership group or whatever. You've taken some sort of action." But what you're doing is you're now coming back to them and following up and say, "At this time, I get that this is a thing, but you know what, right now, we're just not in a position to handle it. We're just not in a position to address it. If there's any other suggestions that you have, we're willing to go ahead and listen to them and we'll consider them. But right now, we've got some bigger fish to fry. But when it does make sense, we're going to come back to you and we're going to figure out how to move forward on this." If you do that, you'd be amazed. Nobody does that these days. I used to work with a manager. He was an ops guy that was notorious for doing that. His people loved him. Absolutely loved him. And when he said he was going to do something, he did it without fail. Without fail. So he was a man of his word and he was an individual that followed up. And I had adopted that And it's amazing. People may not always like what you say. They may not like you as a person, but they'll respect your decisions a little easier when you're being consistent like that. They just love
Yeah.
it.
The respect and trust. And I think like putting my employee hat on, if I share something with management and there's no sort of follow up, just I guess the morale hit that takes because I'm also, again, my own belief, I'm under the influence that if something's important, you'll acknowledge it or you'll do something with it. So if I say or share something or do a piece of work and it just goes into the ether, I'm like, oh, maybe it wasn't that important. And then every
Yeah.
employee wants to feel valued and making a contribution, at least of my generation, they do. It's more than just a job, right? And
Right?
so, yeah, I can just see how the power of the follow-up, that's incredible. It's something seemingly so simple, but so
Yeah.
impactful in terms of leading a team.
Yep. I agree.
And so flipping it the other way, if I'm having challenges with a manager, just clashing. So I'll use a real life example. One of my friends, she's contemplating leaving a job because she's having challenges with some of the senior staff in the organization. Some of the apparently I say apparently because obviously two sides to every story. She's finding what she's finding in her situation. She's saying that a lot of the female managers are just bitchy and they have it out for her and they're highlighting all the things she's not doing well in her job. She's been an EA for 5+ years and she's exceptional at what she does, but she's being challenged by these people in manager positions who are telling her she's not doing a good job and just apparently being a bit bitchy. And so she's like, you know what? I'm going to leave. And she
Yeah.
enjoys the work. She just wants to leave because she's not getting along with management. What would be some words of wisdom you would have
You
for my
know
friend
what?
here?
So women can be catty. We
Yes.
can be very catty. We can be very judgmental, right? I mean, that's the nature of being a woman sometimes. So,
Yeah.
you know what she can try is that when they're starting to come, like, well, you're not doing this right, it's like, she can sit down and say, you know what I would really like to find out is what exactly I am doing good. Tell me
Ooh,
3 things that I'm actually doing well. And believe it or not, it actually may change the brain chemistry.
that's
I mean, but
even
if
just
she's getting
hearing you
ganged
answer this
up on,
question.
that's
Yeah.
all. If she's getting ganged up on, that's like, a gladiator going up against 12 lions. S that's gonna be kinda hard. But if, she can easily come back and say, it's like, "I get a lot of feedback from you that I don't do things well. I would really like to know all the things that I am doing well."
Yeah, I think that's such a powerful question too, because I also think we're also our worst critics. Like chances are we already know or have a good idea of where we're not hitting the mark or where we don't think we're hitting the mark. And I think anyone who actively just shares, for lack of a better term, negative feedback with someone else, it's probably because they're already judging themselves too. I'm like, if you're
Yeah.
always giving someone negative feedback and always saying, this isn't good enough, I'm like, Jesus, it must be really hard being you. It must be really miserable, actually.
Well, you know what? Here's the thing. I heard this amazing quote the other day, and you kinda said something that just resonated, and it's like, you know what you're doing. And where we start losing our well, we start feeling like maybe we don't let me say it this way. There are times where we start feeling like we are losing ground in a power play and something like that. When in fact we likely aren't, but we buy into what we hear because it's the only evidence that's coming to us, right? So I heard this amazing quote the other day. It says, "Never take criticism from somebody you would not ask their opinion from. You would never ask them for help for something. So never take criticism from somebody that you wouldn't ask their advice on whatever that last preposition is, right? You know what I'm talking about. So,
Yeah.
we judgmental people are exactly the people we would never ask advice from on anything. So why are you accepting their criticism for truth and gospel, which is what we do because we don't deal with criticism well. And I cannot stand the phrase constructive criticism because there is no such thing about constructive criticism. It's criticism. Now, if you want to give somebody feedback, have it be developmental, say, hey, listen, this is where we're kind of coming up short here. But if you do X, Y, and Z, I think you might see some positive results. And I can't wait to hear how that works for you. Let me know in about a week. You just coached somebody, you gave them something that tangible that they can take away from. and you're a mature leader. So judgment is another level of immaturity.
I like that. I haven't heard that perspective before. When
Yeah,
you're
you can
talking about,
evaluate.
yeah,
Yeah, you can evaluate and make a determination as to whether somebody is executing properly or not. That's a form of judgment, but it's a form of analysis. That's not judgment. Analysis and judgment are not the same thing. Judgment is rendering a decision based off of information or no information.
and it sounds like as well in terms of criticism and people's opinions, all I'm thinking about, it's like it's the real life internet. Like there's so many different opinions and ways to do things out there. You can find one that resonates with you and that you want to believe. And so if you're asking people who you wouldn't take advice from for feedback, and then you're choosing to take that on board, it's like, why are you doing that to yourself? Like what what happened to you in the past, or what beliefs are you telling yourself that you
Yeah.
need to believe this particular criticism or feedback?
Yeah, I have a friend of mine, um, in one of my companies. I was telling you about a position that I was going to fill. Now, remember, I've been doing this for 30 years. I can't, this isn't my first day. And so he always tells me what to do. It just like kills me. And like there are times I'm like, dude, you are not my husband. It's just like, stop telling me what to do. But I don't say it that way. I just get quiet and I listen. So this one time he's telling me, and he says, okay, so here's what you do. In the job description, you need to include this. You need to, and I stopped him. I said, I want you to stop for a second. I totally interrupted him. I said, let me ask you a question. He goes, what's that? And I said, are you at risk? And I want you to think about this before you answer. Are you at risk of telling a 30-year tenured HR professional how to write a job description when you have never written one a day in your life? And he stops, he goes, yes. He, like, did not finish his statement.
Amazing.
Like, you're not
Amazing.
going there.
And that's such a
It
very
was
that's such a
hilarious.
polite way to, like, check, because there's lots of situations like, I recently had a baby, and the amount of opinions and I guess experiences
Oh,
that
yeah,
men are
you're gonna
sharing
get
with me, I'm like,
every opinion on the
yeah,
planet about motherhood. Yeah.
but especially from men, I'm like, no offense, but you're about to tell a woman who has birthed a child as a man who has never done such feat. Are you trying to tell her what her experience was like?
Yeah. That
Yes.
must have really hurt.
Yes, it did. It's good.
I know. It's fun. People are funny sometimes.
But I love it so much. I think working with people is one of the most rewarding and challenging jobs I think you could ever have.
I would agree.
Yeah. And so, on that note, you provide such great information throughout this podcast. I'm looking forward to going back and pulling out some more of those tips and tricks myself. But what is a really actionable step someone can do in the next 24 to 48 hours to start to overcome their people challenges, whether it's a leader having challenges
Yeah.
with their employees, vice versa, whether they're having potentially even challenges outside of work? It sounds like these principles really apply to people no matter what environments they're in.
So if they want, so to go back on what we were talking about using the phrase, help me understand. So this is one of the two, this is a free gift that I'm offering your audience. And it's all the way over here in the United States. So we're more than happy to do an international exchange of information here. So, um, help me understand was part of my Impact Scripts course, which I give that for free. I have 3 scripts that people can take advantage of. They come to the website. They can go to yobrenda.com. That's yobrenda.com. They
Yeah.
can fill out their information. And there's also going to be a little box that's going to ask them what was the one thing that impressed them the most from what they heard from today. And because I always like capturing, I like finding out what that stuff is, right? If I can figure out how to help people more, then I will absolutely do it. When you do that, you're going to be able to take this course, and I'm going to give you these free scripts, and teach you actually how and when to use them. And they're incredibly impactful. They'll help you navigate the ego, that we talked when we first talked about. It's awesome. But here's something else for your folks to consider. Have you ever found yourself being very drained, very exhausted, or just plain stuck because of toxic behaviors in your workforce? And maybe you might have noticed that how dealing with difficult people is affecting not only your personal job satisfaction, but then also your well-being. And if they feel like their career is being held back or if they're tired of simply going through the motions and wishing that things would improve, ask yourself this question: what if you could change that? So, how would it feel to step into a space where you're confident in handling any difficult personality, no longer letting that behavior dictate your stress, your mood, your personal growth? And imagine walking with a clear plan, feeling completely empowered, and knowing that you're finally in control of the situation. And which is the reason why I created this program, which is called Fortitude Mastering the Unmanageable. It's a proven system designed to help your listeners take back their power. It isn't about quick fixes. It's about creating long-lasting change for yourself and for your career by learning how to navigate and neutralize toxic behavior in nearly any environment. Now, here's the question. What is the personal cost of staying where you are? If you're ready to make a real change and protect your well-being, now's the time for you to take action so you can start building your resilience and reclaiming control, because you deserve a career where you're not just surviving, but you're thriving. So if you're ready to take this next step, go to leadwithfortitude.com/program. That's leadwithfortitude.com/program. This is where you start the transformation of how you deal with difficult people. And I will give you the opportunity to purchase the very first episode for only $37.
I've just got the pages up now. I was like, I need to jump on this ASAP. So I've already signed up for the free resource and I'm looking at the course now. So listeners,
Now you're
you
looking
can
up
do it
new
in
ones.
less than like 30 seconds. Do it now.
Yep.
I mean, I'll put the links in the show notes. So if you're listening to this driving or whatever, I've got you. But make sure you jump on this ASAP, because even just some of those questions alone can dramatically change your relationships and the dynamics you have with individuals. And we know how important relationships are to achieve anything we wish into our life. And
Yeah.
I really like the idea of your course too around fortitude and our ability to influence our lives and the impact and how we show up in them. So I'm looking forward to digging into that too.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your time today. I had an absolute ball and I look forward to unleashing this content on the world.
I'm loving it. Well, I thank you very much for having me on. This has been incredible. I always love being on Australian podcasts. So thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode. I hope this was helpful. If you thought of someone while listening to this podcast, I would be so grateful if you could share this episode with them. While you're doing that, please also take a moment to leave a review on the podcast if you haven't yet already. It takes less than a minute and it means so much to me and helps this podcast to reach more people just like you. Thank you so much for that, and I'll see you in the next episode. In the meantime, go out and achieve every dream you have, because actually, you can.